Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lemon Dew. I'm Brie, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about controversies on the subject of vaccines and autism. So before I begin, I do want to give a quick update in regards to my upload schedule for this podcast. So as you already know, I was meant to upload episodes every 2 weeks. But of course, since my mental health has fluctuated up and down, it's been very difficult for me to upload episodes on here, primarily because my concern is that I didn't want to produce lackluster content. I am still going to do this podcast, however, episodes will not be uploaded on a consistent basis. In terms of the day, of course, episodes will be uploaded on Sundays, and the reason I upload on Sundays is because, as you already know, I do this podcast as well as YouTube and work a full-time job, meaning that I do have to juggle 3 different things and find time in order to record as well as edit and of course put content out there. Now, the reason why there will be some inconsistencies in the schedule in the meantime is because when it comes to uploading the podcast, I want to make sure that I can work in a way which suits me without putting too much pressure on myself to put out content. Of course, I do thank you all for listening to my episodes and offering continuous support, as it's the main thing that drives me to continue with this podcast. I'm glad that I've started it, especially because autism is a subject that people do need to be educated on, especially as even though there is a sense of awareness about it, there are a lot of closed-minded opinions. And the purpose of this podcast isn't necessarily for me to diagnose or give mental health advice like a healthcare professional, as obviously I'm not a healthcare professional. I am just a woman who has lived with autism for 24 years. And of course, the purpose of this podcast isn't to just share my experiences, it's also to educate people. So obviously, I want people to understand what it's like to manage day-to-day life whilst also talking about subjects relating to autism and of course occasional topics of interest. So without further ado, I am now going to begin today's episode. So, of course, the subject of vaccines and autism is quite an interesting one because there have been controversies in relation to the types of vaccines that do cause autism. So, in life, I guess, there have been assumptions that vaccines, particularly the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, have links to autism. Now, autism, as mentioned, is a developmental condition, so it's pretty much a disability which affects how the brain processes certain bits of information, and depending on which level you are on the spectrum, there are certain things that can be difficult. So in my case, for example, I do have a difficulty adapting to change, adapting to certain textures and smells, and of course, when it comes to socializing, although it sounds like I can communicate normally, I do have a difficulty understanding social cues. So it's very difficult for me to understand when, say, for example, people are joking or people are lying to me, especially as I cannot read between the lines very well. And of course, despite the fact that I do work in what is essentially a customer-facing job, there are times where I have to suppress, say, social anxiety in order to appear more confident, when half the time social situations make me want to just curl up into a ball and just stay hidden. Now, of course, as you already know, when it comes to the subject of autism, the higher the level, the more needs the person has and the more support somebody requires. So if, say, you have somebody who is level 1 autistic, i.e. myself, the support needs are low, because typically with level 1 individuals, they have more of an opportunity to lead independent lives. It's just there are certain things, as I've described earlier, that can be very difficult to process. Whereas if you have somebody who is level 3, they might not have the ability to verbalize, let alone advocate for themselves. Therefore, a carer is required to make decisions on their behalf. Now, in terms of the clinical descriptions relating to autism, there are two primary types caused via early onset or regression. And there have been cases where scientists have come to a general consensus regarding autism being caused by other factors, such as prenatal exposures to valproic acid at an early stage or thalidomide, either this or genetical causes. Now, scientific studies have been conducted to confirm that, of course, there are no links between vaccines and autism. But there have been myths primarily surrounding the topic of vaccines causing autism. And a lot of these myths have been made by controversial groups such as Autism Speaks, which is, of course, a charity that I do not support for certain reasons. And in a future episode, I will probably talk more about Autism Speaks and some of the harmful PSAs/advertisements they've put out and why things like this are harmful. And I may even do a future episode where I talk about autism in media, more or less specifically relating to how autistic characters are portrayed, because that's another topic I have been wanting to get into for quite some time. So going back to today's subject, of course, you either have these types of groups saying that vaccines cause autism without the facts to back up what they're saying, or of course you have concerned parents refusing to vaccinate their children because they're worried that having vaccines pumped into the body will increase the chances of them gaining autism. Or you even have doctors and scientists saying that vaccines cause autism. Now, as mentioned earlier, some people do say that the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine is linked to autism, which is not really the case. I mean, with measles in general, for example, it is an infection which is typically caused by fevers, coughing, runny nose, inflamed eyes and red rash. So it's very difficult to say how the vaccine causes autism, but really it doesn't. Now, in relation to this vaccine, there was a debate back in 1998 when a controversial newspaper was published by a British researcher named Andrew Wakefield. And this was regarding the link of the MMR vaccine and autism. Vaccinations for this particular disease did decrease because, of course, you had ignorant celebrities claiming that the vaccine in question caused autism. Now, the paper was in fact labelled as a fraud, and the research was later debunked because, of course, it was proven that the vaccine had no links to autism. But people still question whether it increased the risk. And there were more increases in publicity because you had instances where the amount of autism-related diagnosis increased over time. Now, the Immunisation Safety Review Committee, which was established by the Institute of Medicine, investigated the hypothesis regarding vaccines, particularly MMR and furosemide-containing vaccines, TCVs. Now, their assessment was followed by a framework established by previous committees, considering the weight of the evidence and categorizing conclusions into levels ranging from no evidence to the evidence establishing a causal relationship. The review involved an examination of epidemiological studies, which were given the most weight in determining causality, as well as an assessment of biological mechanisms that could potentially link the vaccines to such adverse events. Now, the findings were released in a series of reports, and the eighth report specifically addressed the link between vaccines and autism hypothesis. And of course, the point of the work of the committee was aimed to assess not only the scientific evidence, but the broader societal significance of these issues, informing public health responses, research needs, and communication strategies. Now, extensive literature was of course revealed by the committee, and there were scientific meetings that were open to gather information. And of course, there was an investigation prompted by persistent public and scientific concerns regarding vaccine safety, leading the CDC and NIH to seek independent expert reviews. Now, of course, in relation to the subject of vaccines and autism, it is hard to say exactly what causes it, but experts have discovered that there are several risk factors which can include genetic mutations or genetic variations, or genetic risks of siblings or other family members being diagnosed with autism, or even conditions, i.e. Down syndrome. Additional research to this day is still being conducted to discover if any additional risk factors cause autism, such as specific environments or complications with health, i.e. low birth weight. Now, I know today's episode was quite short, but of course I do want to thank you for supporting and listening to this particular episode today. Now, as per mentioned, I'm still going to release episodes on Sundays, but this will be more or less on a basis when I am able to have the time to record and produce. Now, the next episode, which will be released in a couple of weeks, is about the subject of infantilization of autistic adults. So I want to look into why autistic adults in particular go through experiences where people sort of treat them as if they're children. And I want to even look into my own experiences, as I have gone through this myself before. So mainly in secondary school, and especially growing up with an extended family that didn't understand my needs. That is, if you've listened to previous episodes. Unfortunately, I've had my fair share of experiences where people have talked down to me, not because I was autistic only, but because in certain environments I was the youngest of a group of people. So in the case of, say, my older cousins on my dad's side of the family, because I was the youngest, people would act like I didn't know anything, and I had to kind of stay in one place, which I absolutely hated because I felt patronized. So I do want to take a look at this in particular, especially in relation to how infantilization affects autistic women. So as always, I do hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday and have a great day. And until the next time, I will see you soon in my next episode. Bye for now.